Hello, Otto.
Hi,
Warm
Thomas.
welcome, and warm welcome to everybody. So this is our second event now within this conference, and the first one that is public here right now. So first of all, Otto, I want to tell you that I really enjoyed our former dialogues. They were always very generative and creative and innovative. So I'm happy to be here with you. And so there, I think this conversation rests on the ground of global social witnessing. So this whole conference that our conversation is part of explores what is global social witnessing, and maybe how your work and the work of global social witnessing, are in dialogue with each other, find similarities and differences maybe. And so global social witnessing is a term that we developed already some years ago as a kind of inner practice of individuals and communities, or intelligent networks of communities, how we, in a way, presence and witness our cultural process. And since, like, when there are unconscious processes and traumatized parts of individuals and cultures, or absent parts, as you put it beautifully, Otto. So we see that the inner experience and the outer experience are not synchronized, and this creates individual and cultural symptoms that we are struggling with often, because we lose our capacity to respond, to be in resonance with, to be related to, and we, in a way, often fall back into patterns of reactivity, polarization, disconnect, and separation. And I think I remember our last conversation where we had a very lively conversation about like how we come from different paths to, I believe, often similar kind of explorations or revelations. So, and I would love maybe for you, Otto, to share a little bit. I love the concept of presencing, of course, but I also love your way of describing absencing. And maybe can you speak a little bit to these two terms that deeply ingrained in your work?
Yes, I would be very happy to, Thomas. So also warm welcome to everyone from my end. And yes, I fully echo that, Thomas. The conversations we had so far have always been, whether they are recorded or not, have always been very inspiring and opening new avenues and insight also for myself. So I really look forward to this continuation, kind of this next installment of our unfolding conversation and relationship. And I also really loved the lecture that you just gave, and that I had the possibility to attend, and resonate with so many of the distinctions and the concepts that you introduced. And I have maybe just to start with maybe two points that in particular resonated, and that I would love to learn more about from you, and get more input from you. One is your remark that when you talked about the we presencing, that there is what we can observe is, and that's exactly what I have also experienced. So when you develop coherence on a collective level, kind of when you begin to build containers or kind of spaces of resonance on the level of the collective, what you begin to see is, so I wrote it down, but I don't want to look it up now, but you said something like that the individual kind of is also uplifted. You didn't use that particular word, but you described it, that kind of the capacity of the individual to tap into that coherence is heightened through that. And that's exactly also what I have been observing, and what is so important when you think about strategies for change and when you think about practical change work. Because often, like I would say, even from the consciousness-based people, right? So there's, and also, you know, there's a lot of emphasis on the individual development, which of course is key, which of course is absolutely necessary, but it's not sufficient, right? Because it's on the collective level that we can develop a whole other leverage point for individual and for collective development. So I thought that was, I was very inspired by that remark, and I would love to learn more. And then I also, the way you unfolded the term and explained and introduced the term of global social witnessing, so much resonates with what I try to, you know, be in service of and, you know, cultivate from my end, that would be really great to explore that a little further. So just to come back to your request, what I could think is what might be useful. Let me just try to find the screen share here to introduce maybe just one one piece here. Can you see that, the screen share?
Yes.
Okay. So in a way, what became to me, this could be kind of one slide that may be a useful reference point for, you know, introducing a little bit about absencing, and also then, you know, closing with a question to you. The starting point, and that's also what I really, so we live in a profound, as Bea mentioned in her opening remarks, we live in a profound moment of disruption. And disruption comes with pain and grief. And disruption also comes with a gift. And the gift is that the moment disruption hits, we can have a glimpse of awareness of what it truly is that's essential for us. Because we are in a profound moment of letting go and letting come. And when you turn around your attention to, you know, to yourself, to your own feeling, knowing of what it truly is, what's essential for you, and what it is that it's not, which often happens to be all the things we are busy with, that is can be a profound moment of awakening. So this, and what I experienced in the current moment is that there is really, when disruption happens, there is this potential gift that I just mentioned, but there's also a choice. And the choice is the inner place from which we operate when we respond to that situation. And that inner place can be either downloading, which is more of the same, which is less and less viable in many situations, which can be turning away or turning toward. And turning away is basically a freeze reaction of the mind, heart, will, aka ignorance, hate, and fear. And turning toward or leaning in to something that we don't know what it is, the emerging future, requires us to open the mind, open the heart, open the will, aka access our capacities of curiosity, compassion, and courage. And that, of course, is a lot of what we practice, right, in our various awareness-based communities, and which we contribute in a variety or try to cultivate. But the interesting thing is, particularly in the last 2 or 3 years, we have seen an enormous amplification of the absencing, the cycle of absencing, which is, as you can see, it's not when you see here, seeing, sensing, letting go, and then connecting to source, presencing. It's like blinding, not seeing, desensing, not sensing, getting stuck in our filter bubbles, and then holding on, not letting go. And when you go through, and then absencing means losing the connection to our highest future self, to our highest future possibility, which then makes us subject of manipulation. So we can more easily manipulate it and move into these kinds of behaviors that we see down here, rather than connecting with something that is wanting to emerge through us and being in the service of that. And so that's basically just on a distinction level, something where when you look at what's happening today, what's happening in responses to disruption, we see these 3 responses. The first one is downloading, same old, same old. The second one is moving into freeze reaction. And freeze reaction means you're cutting the horizontal connection. Your absencing means you're cutting the vertical connection. And any being that is experiencing that, cutting the horizontal connection to what's going on around you, cutting the vertical connection to your highest future possibility. So any being that is going through such a process of trauma, you might say, is moving into these kinds of behaviors. And which is the cycle of destruction or self-destruction. So what we see is an enormous amount of seeds down here. And that's, I believe, an emerging global movement at this point in history, which is probably the most important story not told, or not well told. Because it's a movement that is just beginning to become aware of itself. While here on this side, we have had things going on all the time, all the centuries behind. But what we see now is an enormous amplification mechanism through a certain use of technology, social media, and many other things. I mean, you mentioned some of them in your talk, Thomas. So that's basically the backdrop, right? In terms of distinctions, we could, there is another version, kind of. I think just to maybe close with this bigger picture. What does that mean on the level of the collective? On the level of so I think what we need in response is cultivating these capacities, but also a collective response that deals with creating new learning infrastructures, reinventing our learning infrastructures towards whole person, whole system, right? Head, heart, and hand. New democratic infrastructures that make governance and democracy more direct and distributed and dialogic, and new economic infrastructures that, defragmentize you. So to use your term from earlier, Thomas, the economy, in order to make it focusing on the well-being of all, shifting it from ego to ecosystem awareness. But coming back to the distinction here, So Thomas, my question is this, and I also want to share a little story, really, how I came up with this whole concept here. And that was in Paris with Francesco Varela, whose work many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with. So he is really the founder or co-founder of the Mind and Life Institute, and has been very, very influential. And so the conversations with him, I only had two when I did kind of the basic research for the Theory U concept, have been very influential for me. The first one, what he said in the first one, and it really resonates with everything you shared before the break, Thomas, in your talk. In the first conversation, he said, there is a blind spot in Western science, and the blind spot happens to be our experience. So we do not have a method how we become aware of our experience. And that's the blind spot. So of cognition science, the problem, he said, is not that we don't know what's going on in the brain. The problem is that we don't know how we access our experience, how experience is coming into the world. And that is exactly where you started your definition, Thomas, right? So when you start with the global social witnessing, or actually with the term witnessing. So the process of becoming aware. So 4 years later, shortly before he passed away, I went back to him to Paris and said, hey, so very many practitioners that I gave this interview to read really resonated with that statement. The blind spot of science is experience, and the blind spot of cognition science is experience. How we access experience. Have you done any work on that? And he said, well, that has been the main focus, he responded, of his past 4 years of work. And what he came up with is that there actually are 3 methodologies that address that issue, which is psychological introspection, phenomenology, and meditation. And that he synthesized these 3 processes with 3 key gestures of becoming aware that each of them is talking about. And the 3 gestures of becoming aware is, and you see that here on the left-hand side, suspension, redirection, and letting go. So that was his summary from a practice point of view, which means what is the process, that the shift that your awareness is going through, that your attention is going through. That's what he called. So these three gestures is what he called the process of becoming aware. Suspending our habits of judgment, redirecting. And so when he talked about that, he was talking about redirecting from the object to the source. And by source, he meant the process through which the object is coming into being, which is exactly the shift of awareness, Thomas, that you talked about when you introduced the term of awareness prior to the break. And then the letting go and letting come. So when he explained these 3 terms, I realized that I had seen these shifts many, many times, but not from studying phenomenology or meditation, which I did not. I'm just an amateur, but from seeing it in social processes, right? So when you take a team through a process, any kind of team development, you move through these stages, right? Stop people downloading, right? Make them listening to each other, and then, redirecting, kind of bringing in all the different perspectives, and beginning to see the situation through the eyes of the other. And then when we are lucky, right, we move through this process where we truly let go, right, and open up to that what's wanting to emerge. So I had seen this process many times. And I instantly knew that what he was describing, what Francesco Varela was describing on the level of the individual, studying meditation, phenomenology in particular, particularly Husserl, can be also observed on the level of the collective, right? On the level of groups. And then later I described the same thing on the evolution of organizations and the evolution of economies and societies. So it's the same turns that we go through. And that's basically where the concept of theory U was born, if you want. So this, it's an epistemological distinction that Varela came up with that is looking at our own process of becoming aware, but applying that not only to the level of the individual, but also to the level of the collective. And when I heard you speaking, Thomas, so and this is kind of just, and if I put that into the terms of this concept, I think there is like the, what you in particular emphasized was kind of curiosity, open mind, right? That's not enough, because that still is, so the open mind is still an object awareness, right? You see the world outside. You're not actually blinding yourself. And that's already something really important, right? And we see right now in the Corona crisis, right? So look at the US government. If you have an institution, if you have a government that's stuck here in old habits, right? That is not noticing the disconfirming data, you're in trouble. All countries are in trouble. When you look at East Asia, the Confucianist governments that have, that are leading the response to the corona, but also kind of some of the more functioning governments in Europe, you start with open mind. You know what's going on. You apply testing, even though it's not like a deep awareness, right, on these deeper levels. That's already putting you into a whole other playing field. So what I'm saying is this is important, but it's not all. And I think, Thomas, what you were talking about is kind of from this subject-object awareness, right? Seeing something going on, not just projecting your own opinion in the post-truth world, like, you see going on in many places. You actually, you look at the data, kind of, you bring in the experts, these kinds of things. But then that's not what awareness is. You said awareness is when you really transcend, when this boundary between subject and object begins to open up. So that's really the concept of sensing. Sensing means not just seeing something out there, but it's like the process of resonance, right? And resonance is a process that is transcending the subject of the object distinction, and that allows you kind of to lean into this social space of or you talked about the synchronizing of the inner and the outer. So I felt kind of that's what you really emphasized, the transition for from here to here. And so here are my two questions. Number one, kind of, do you agree with this interpretation? And number two, so what I'm also emphasizing is this here, even though that subject-object awareness is of critical importance, because today we don't even have that in many places. We have this thing going on, right? Post-truth world. We live in our filter bubbles. Kind of, there is, on a collective level, an extended process of denial going on. So response time in East Asia after the first corona case was reported, 3 days. And that's why they now have all the freedoms there. After 3 days, the government response was there in Singapore, in Hong Kong, in Taiwan. You go to the US, it was more than 6 weeks. And when you lose 6 weeks in an epidemic situation right now, it means everything. And the price will be paid by all the vulnerable people that are kind of now having an incredible wave of suffering ahead, particularly kind of in countries where the government was stuck here and not operating kind of from this awareness. So what I'm saying is, one, this also matters here, whether you're here or here, and that's what we learn. And the second one is, of course, the real challenge is then to move from here to the deeper, dimensions of awareness. And what I would just be interested, Thomas, is because kind of this is kind of the empathy and compassion. It's kind of one space where, so the distinction between this space and the open will, which is kind of the truly non-dual kind of where the boundary completely opens up and and is no longer there, and where I think where we more begin to operate from an emerging future or from a larger whole that hasn't yet manifested that. So whether those are distinctions that are also, that you also notice and are working with, particularly in the collective processes you're leading. So I think that's a question I would have.
Yeah, great, Otto, fantastic. Wow, it's so lovely. First of all, I resonate with so many things that you said right now, and I really love your kind of drawings or models here. I will say a few things, like, of course, like we are using different terminologies, but I think we are talking about like almost the same things from different angles. Like I would say the fact that all of us have been born in a collectively traumatized world, into a collective traumatized world, means that fragmentation and separation for many of us have been the building blocks of a normal world. And that means also trauma comes with the dissynchronization of the physical body, our emotional experience, and our mental experience. And often the physical, like bringing information from our rational minds and science really supports our rational mind. So, which on the one hand is super fantastic. I mean, we all love science and we all love the benefits that our societies have, but it can also just cover up the inability to feel and sense. So from your open mind to compassion and heart, it's compassion, but it's also like emotional integration and relation. And so, and I love, you said one thing that I want to come back to. You said that like working just on self-awareness is not enough, because the tendency to do it on my own is kind of often close to I'm alone. I need to struggle alone. That's what many children in their attachment process experience with their parents. So if I'm already a bit traumatized, I will have a tendency to lean towards doing it alone, or I will be very symbiotic. But in the middle, there is a healthy discernment between what I can do on my own, in my own practice, and where I need you to support me to see something that I cannot see and I cannot find out. And many postmodern people don't want to accept the fact that there are things that we cannot do alone. You know, I can sit many hours alone in meditation, but for some things, I need sometimes skilled people that give me a mirror to see myself where I cannot see myself. And the nature of not seeing myself is my own protection function. And so I love it that you said, I often say responsibility is, and you said it in different words, that responsibility is the ability to respond to my given life circumstances, which means I know what I can do alone when it's time for me to go into contemplation, reflection, self-exploration, and so on. And I know now it's the time I need to reach out either to another individual to reflect something in a relational space, or I need to be part of a community, because as you also mentioned, the community has a power to amplify the individual's awareness. And And this works both ways, as you lovely mentioned in your own words, that fragmentation has a tendency to be contagious, like a virus, and presence has the possibility to be contagious, like a virus. We have the choice. A fragmented leader most probably brings the fragmentation into a system. And we see this over and over again. We see this in institutions, we see this in companies, organizations, even governments, where the fragmentation of leadership shows up in the culture. So fragmentation is like a force that helps us to organize the pixels on our screen. And if we are not aware, the only way to deal with it is through awareness. If not, it becomes our destiny. And destiny means unconscious processes run us. Only conscious processes have a choice. For the unconscious process, the choice has been made in the past. If millions of people have been put to concentration camps, that choice has been made already. The after effects of this collective trauma, the after effects run us. And that's why I love your absencing description, because it's so beautifully describing many of the collective trauma symptoms that I believe create lit up. Trauma comes with absence. It comes with, I don't feel a part that was too overwhelming. And that's why the remedy for it is to respect that the root of absencing is actually an attempt of the individual or the culture to protect itself from a much worse fragmentation. And then there's,
What does that mean? Protect itself from a much worse
yeah.
separation, such
So
as
let's say a child in a family, and a child in an attachment process needs a parent to be safe. Like in the first years of our life, our parents are our safety. And fear is an emotion that brings kids back to the parents. So fear is an emotion of connection. It's not many people, because once we are hurt, we experience fear as separation. But actually, fear is evolutionary wise also to get us to a safe place. And as kids, we run back to the parents. They go out, like we are curious, and then we run back to the parents. We go out, we explore the world. So curiosity becomes courage. Fear becomes when my parents help me to co-regulate my nervous system, to help me to deal with my stress. On the level of mom or dad, I can relax, and then I become naturally curious again. But this moment of co-regulation is like you plug into the nervous system of the parent. Like this, my central nervous system learns how to regulate stress, fear, and relaxation and openness. Many people have difficulties meditating because unconsciously there's a lot of stress in the nervous system that is not anymore on our radar. We don't feel it anymore. So when a child is often in fear and stress, there's a moment when the child decides, and it's not just a rational decision, I turn off the strong fear, I contract, and I create a small pond of stillness where I am still in formation. Information is the key element. The nervous system needs to stay in a form. So it needs to stay informed. That's the nature. And trauma fragments the nervous system, but the nervous system tries to shut down the part that is too overwhelming in order to keep a functionality going, that where I still feel my autonomy, I can stay true to what you call the will, to my becoming, because out of being is becoming. And that's what you beautifully said, like the out of presence comes innovation. But innovation is my contract with life to keep on evolving and developing and growing. And so when the child, the protection function actually protects the sacred part of the becoming, protects the presence part, and shuts down the other part. So when we reverse that process, many people judge themselves, oh, I shouldn't be this is my weakness, I shouldn't be that, I shouldn't be so disconnected. But once I feel disconnected in life, judging my disconnect as bad is not helpful. And the opposite, it just makes it worse because I want to get rid of it. And I disown it even more, where actually disconnecting when I was a 3-year-old boy was the best I could do, not to be flooded with overwhelming pain, fear, stress, whatever. So I stayed true to the becoming part, to the emerging part.
Mm.
And and so I think that that's beautifully said. I think we just use a very different language, but I think that addressing cultural absence is by understanding that even also on a cultural level, the absencing part is switching many, for example, in Germany, many cities being bombed, many people sitting in their basements, trying to survive, is a huge stress, a huge trauma, fragmentation on a collective level. Many people in concentration camps, many people in slavery, many people in dictatorships and other war zones around the world, in Syria right now. In order to survive, a lot of experience needed to be suppressed. And that's an intelligent function, but once it's frozen and it's not being released through relation, we sit in the after effects that you describe. And now we need to find a way how to reverse that process so that we can come back to a collective sensing, a collective defragmentation, a collective coherence. And I think that's our job, how not to be part of the symptom, that it's outside, but it's actually something that we can learn to relate to as an intelligent defense function of the collective body, the collective system. And that's, I think, the art. And I think you said in one of our earlier talks, you said something beautiful. We need to find the right healing or integration architecture. We need to find the right architecture that allows us, and I think that's what you develop beautifully in the social presencing work. What is the right architecture? How to build coherence, build enough safety, build enough emergence, and then connect those intelligent systems to each other. And maybe the last thing in response to what you said is, and that's coming more because I'm a friend of wisdom traditions. In the Bible, there is the moment when, like, the voice of God appears to the Hebraic people on Mount Sinai. And this moment is described, and I'll say in a minute why I'm talking about this. This moment is being described as the most universal presence. Speaking, the word is creation. There shall be light. There is light. Light, the word light and light is not two. So the word of the most universal presence speaks to the whole population there around Mount Sinai, the whole group. It's a group awakening. And at the end, after this experience, this collective awakening, everybody said, God spoke to me personally. That's an interesting part of the whole thing. Like, it didn't say God spoke about general ideas. No, it said the most universal spoke to the most specific, to my life story, my family situation, and everybody said that. And there is, like, that's a huge, I believe, a huge piece of wisdom there, because what it means is exactly what you also spoke about, that we need collective presencing, because every individual holds a unique particle of the whole. And so, but we need the whole to support every individual. So the intelligence is actually not in the isolation, the intelligence is in the inevitable entanglement, in the positive entanglement of the individual, that the individual and the collective are never separate, they're always interdependent. And that's, I believe, in this revelation in the Bible, you see that's an essential, in my understanding, an essential principle of healing. And it is also, as you described it, in groups that are very present, there's an up-leveling of the individual intelligence, capacity, ability, innovation capacity. So the more coherent our groups, the more every individual in the group actually becomes aware of life. It's like as if there was a cloud computing that connected all of us, and we are kind of, we can participate in this cloud computing in a way consciously. And if not, then it seems like we are just separate, you know, we happen to be one of multiple people in the room. And sometimes we tap into this. And I think also in our last conversation, when you described a process that you once participated in Berlin, when you spoke about it, it reminded me very much of some of our collective trauma processes that are pretty similar, what it means to tap into that intelligence that is more universal. And it also, and that's the last piece, it also, I believe, says that more universal doesn't mean general. In this revelation in the Bible, it doesn't say God said something general. No, it's, if the voice speaks, it's specifically individual. Maybe it's also specifically collective, but it's not general. It's not a general information. And I love this. And I think this underlines many, many things that you said before, are kind of part of like the guidance, in a way, the wisdom guidance would very much underline many things you said before.
Wow. My mind is exploding, Thomas, from all the different dimensions you touched on. So just like echoing some of that with small pieces adding to that. So that the last, so to your last point, it's not general, kind of, it's universal. So I think I always loved, who comes to my mind is the work of Henry Bortoft, that maybe some of you may be familiar with. So he is a phenomenologist, but also philosopher of science, and he taught at Schumacher. And so he has this wonderful distinction between the authentic and the counterfeit whole. So the authentic whole is something, and to explore, to connect with the authentic whole. So it's not kind of the general, but the universal principle that you are referring to. What we need to do is to move into the particulars, right? So when you want to explore the general whole, or what he called the counterfeit whole, that's the abstraction. And what you do as kind of as a movement towards the world is you step back and you abstract, right? And you look at all the things and then you abstract from the particulars. But if you want to connect with the authentic whole, kind of the universal wisdom you are talking about, then you need to not step back, but step in. You lean forth. You move into the particular. And that, as an epistemological strategy, right, is really, has been so inspiring and instructive for me, because in any kind of social process, in any kind of, where you deal with disruption, where you work with an organization or an individual or a community, that's always the first question. What do you do? Are you like, pulling yourself out, or are you leaning in, right? And then really look the particulars kind of a microcosm as, and so another principle he explained in that conversation is the whole is presencing itself in the parts. It's not kind of above, it's not hovering above. It's like it's the whole is presencing in the parts, but it, you know, it all depends on the level, you would say, kind of the awareness, right, that we give to the microcosm, that we give to the parts. So I thought this as a strategy. Are you pulling yourself back, you know, and, you know, looking at all the abstract studies, or are you moving into the particulars? Are you seeking and establishing kind of the human connection at the front line of something? I think that's a very different initial move, and it makes all the difference. So that's the first thing that that comes to my mind. It has to do also with a different concept of science, right? And so what? So it's a concept of science that, you know, is more based on phenomenology, and it's more based on quantum science, Bartov would say, and it's also more based on activating. And I think the original inventor of that line of work was Goethe, kind of, who really proposed, who thought that what the German poet that some of you may be familiar with, and who thought that his most important contribution, he is like a famous poet, the German poet, but he didn't think that was his most important work. He thought what was most important about his work was something just about everyone has forgotten about or never understood, which is his phenomenological approach to science, right? A science that is really today kind of, maybe we would, you know, is exploring with a method the space you described in your lecture before the break, right? Which is the space of resonance, kind of where we begin to synchronize or to feel the resonance between the inner and the outer, and where the object awareness is subject-object awareness is transcended. And that's really, I think, still a threshold today, because if we do not bring scientific methodologies into these deeper levels of resonance, I think we will always have like only partial successes or failures, but will not be able to really reach the level of impact that I think this decade is called for. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind.
Yes, I have one response to that. It's very interesting that often we see that when somebody describes his or her inner process, so since we're doing a lot of process work, so we are looking at, okay, what actually happened? What's the difference between interpretation and understanding? Understanding would be what you called before vertical alignment and horizontal alignment. But if the body, emotions, mind, spirit or soul and presence are in one alignment, it means that my rational capacity is an emergence of a connection in my emotional and physical self. They are not two. And the interesting thing when you talk about the contribution to science is, and I think we all know this from our own experience, that we might think about our body instead of feeling the body directly, we think about it. So we are using a function that is a bridge in order to compensate on what I can't feel directly. And that's very interesting, because if this is the basis of many people's experience, and I see this over and over again because I run processes all the time, so if that's the collective basis, if the absence is partly the basis of our scientific approach, then it's an interesting thing. And the next thing that is also interesting, just seeing from the regular process work, because many people say, especially maybe even now in a crisis situation, we might say, oh, if I just hadn't that much fear, if I could just get rid of my fear, I would be a better person. But how often, and I know that is a bit gross what I'm saying now, but how often do we think about when a door is not so big and I don't fit through it in the straight way, I will cut my arm in order to go through this door. Nobody would do this, or hardly anybody, let's say. I don't know if nobody, but so we would try to get through, before we cut our arm, we would do many other things that we would try out to get through this door, if it's a very small door. And but the interesting thing is that the unconscious symptom of emotional dissociation is that it's other.
Mm.
And the other is what I don't feel. Is my fear is same my body as is my arm. It's an emotional quality that is part of my nervous system. It's me. And if I feel it as other, as dissociated other, it's easy to cut it off.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's very interesting. Instead of right now in a crisis situation like now, either we support each other to digest the fears that come up, because most probably many of the fears that we see now are actually prior trauma layers that are coming up in us as stress and fear right now, that actually need to be digested in order to come to a place of presencing and sensing. If not, then the absencing part of your diagram will actually explode.
Yeah.
Because we charge that part with a lot of unconscious energy, and the other part will be relatively smaller. And so it's really important what you said also about Goethe is the phenomenology of the resonance experience. Like, am I approaching reality, or like really deepening my awareness of reality through resonance, or through looking at, as if I look at something other? And that process of othering is a very interesting unconscious process. But I think there's a lot to what you said. I think it's a very good summary also of the wisdom tradition that I talked about before, but also about the psychological unconscious process that that dissociates aspects of us. Yeah. So yeah, that's lovely.
No, that's beautiful. And you know, the other thing that that really resonated with me is the quote, the Bible quote, and kind of the universal. I think what and the way you explained it is really, I would say, a new concept or a new notion of the collective. And I think that's today one of the problems we have. I mean, we have one word, it's collective. And what's meant by that, it's so many different things, right? It could be the Soviet style of collective, which is really not enhancing, but, you know, destroying or totally reprogramming, say, kind of so that's kind of the old notion of the collective that is annihilating and reprogramming the individual, while a new the concept of the collective that you described, so it was like not annihilating but enhancing individuality, but not in separation of the whole, but, you know, in resonance kind of with the whole. And I think that's really what in reality we try to cultivate. And, you know, I you know, maybe also later give a more recent example of that, because I think there's a huge potential in the world, as you were indicating. But often, because we use this word, it triggers all these, you know, 20th century experiences where we have seen where that term, particularly in a German context, but in generally also, has been associated with some of the worst things we have been seeing. And so my question also would be, so since what we observe now in such a crisis or disruptive situation, which, you know, many people feel is just the beginning of many more of these things to come, of course, in this decade. So how is it, and we see when we create these holding spaces, a lot is coming up that's actually not of mind, as you said. So we are born into that. So what's coming up in a collective container is part of this, is kind of beginning to manifest or make visible this more, the darkness, kind of the collective trauma that is not attended to through awareness. And so I would be just interested in what you have to say, since many people are now in this situation. So what are like kind of practical things, you know, principles or practices that you have seen really applicable there from your work that could be now offered to others?
Yeah, yeah. So I would love to circle back first to um, I think if we take three elements that we spoke about now in our conversation, it's kind of the individual awareness. So I need to have practices how to be able to induce more individual witnessing, like in my own process, individual regulation and relation to myself. So if I don't feel myself, I can't feel you.
Mm.
So if I'm numb in myself, I can think about you, but I can't really feel you. I don't feel your body. I don't feel your emotions. I'm not in a field, as you said about Goethe, I'm not in a field of resonance. But if I feel myself well, even through the internet, that we are now most probably thousands and thousands of miles apart, we can feel each other. We can be in a resonance. We feel something when we talk to each other. That's amazing. And that's non-local. It doesn't mean that if you sit in Boston and I sit in Tel Aviv, that we can't feel each other, and we can feel each other quite well. And so that's one thing. So once I'm more connected to myself, then I can be in resonance with you. I can be a compassionate, empathic witness of your process and you for me. So there's a like relational skills that we need to build. But then I think as you said, this is the time to create coherent we spaces where we space practice, which means everyone in a we space is not an audience. Also like now, either people who listen to us right now perceive themselves as an audience, then I can lean back and say, okay, I can listen to what Otto has to say or what Thomas has to say. So I am just a kind of an outside listener. Or I'm a participant in life. Once I'm a participant in life, I'm never outside. It's like when people say the system is, yeah, but where does it put you? Like, where does it put the person that says the system is? So which system and where are you when the system is over there? So that's an interesting question. And so when we see, wow, in the interdependence that you spoke about, like the universal, the collective, the collective that is actually in a way the most interested in the most individual thriving and development, because that enhances the collective development too. So they are kind of in this positive resonance. So then the that I always participate wherever I go. If I go to the symphony orchestra, I'm not just an outside listener. I'm a participant in the music. I am a participant, as if I was as if I were like a musician. Like I am a participant in the music. That's how I get the transmission of the composer, the genius musicians, the conductor, the whole composition of the organizing principle, bringing many individuals that are very professional musicians. But what I really love and why I get goosebumps and why I'm touched is because of the coherence of the music. And that means a higher
Mm.
organizing principle is
Mm.
at work. That's why we need a conductor. And I think that to develop we spaces with the right ingredients
Mm.
of coherence building tools, then every time somebody speaks, if I know that it's not I'm listening to another person and then I want to say something. No, the other person that's speaking is speaking a part of me too. And if I really listen, I get the benefit of that part of wisdom. And then when I speak, I serve the community and the community serves me too. So there is this kind of interrelatedness. And I believe we need the three levels also on the, when we now, many people switch to Zoom. But in order to make Zoom or online platforms, not mental spaces merely, we need to practice something in order to make it warm embodied spaces of resonance building. And I think if we do this well, like individually, relationally, and collectively, then we create more coherent fields. And those fields, I believe, express new levels of resilience, as you say, through collective presencing, more levels of innovation capacity, creativity, faster responsiveness to what's really needed in this time in our world. And the more uncertain the world becomes, the more we need this kind of collective stability. Not because we are dependent, but because we are interdependent and we serve each other's highest potential. And if that works really well, then I think then this kind of we spaces can be very powerful answers to global disruptions, as you said.
Mm.
And that's why I also appreciate your work so much, because I think you bring many of these aspects through your work into the world that create this kind of collective presencing, and I think we do similar things through the collective trauma work, and that's why I feel a lot of resonance
Yeah.
with your work.
Well, and likewise, same goes the other way. So just to maybe give two examples. I think two practical examples that are which are both connect to the current situation, to everything you just said, because what you said is really also beautifully articulating what I was what I maybe could not have articulated that well, but the direction my own thinking is also going. And I think the direction of many people really so because we all feel that, but
right.
We can't quite see it in all cases yet. But I want to just point the various layers of our conversation and relate that to the current situation. Because what I find so interesting is everything that we have been talking about the past hour plus or so is actually happening around us, between us, within us, right? And so starting with the around us, right, the corona situation. So the first, so here maybe 3, 4, 5 kind of sentences to really summarize at least my take on that, right, what I'm seeing. So the first one is, so obvious. I mean, yes, we knew it before, but now everyone sees that, which is we are all connected, right? We are many, we are one. So it's no longer Wuhan, right? One. So it's all of us. I mean, it has been such an instructive case of making visible. And by the way, I love before your distinction. I think you said unconscious processes are driving us. It's only conscious processes where we have a choice, right? And that's, so now Corona is the teacher, right? Because it teaches us we are all interconnected, right? If you didn't believe that before, if you said, well, that's just a obscure philosophy, now it's very clear, right? So everyone is, the reality is telling us. So that's the first one. And then the second teaching is in terms of the response, right? So when you look at universal basic income, or here in the US, right, the only developed country that doesn't have universal health care and so on, suddenly it's all there, right? We never had money for that, but now it's all there because reality is forcing you, right? You want to protect yourself, but you don't want to give the test to certain parts of the population. No, that's no longer working, right? So the interdependency is really coming home, right? So it's reality is we are in denial, right? And reality is holding it into our face. Are you getting it now, right? And so that's kind of the seeing part. So we are interconnected. The second sentence is, you change the system, right? Or in your words, to rephrase your sentence from before, you could say, what's most systemic is most personal, right? So So your behavior is changing the system, right? If you are not doing kind of the physical distancing, kind of that's the behavior that will be killing our healthcare systems, and vulnerable people will pay the price. So that's kind of the second teaching, of course, that's coming from all of that. And I would say the third one is, if disruption happens, you have to be awake. If you continue downloading, right, well, you get your country, your people kind of into the major trouble. We're in here right now in this country, and it's just the starting point. You have to be awake, right? You see something going on. The Confucianist governments, after 3 days, they were there. So it's Hong Kong, Taiwan, Singapore. And that's the third. That's just an example, but you know, awakeness, I think, is the universal principle. And then when you double click on the awakeness, that's of course your whole talk from before the break, right? So, and I would say, so one sentence to summarize that from this point of view is, when disruption happens, you have a choice. Right? If you pay attention to what's happening, you have a choice. What kind of choice? The choice from what inner place you're responding to that situation. Whether you move into the presencing or the absencing. And that choice is really what is now apparent to many of us as a possibility, both on an individual level, but interestingly also on the level of the collective. And I think that's really the moment we are living in, and many people feel that, right? So this kind of forced slowdown that we are living in has an enormous possibility for this awakening, for deepening the awakening along the lines that we have been dialoguing around. And so I wrote up a little, version of this thing. Not around these lines, but it's around this topic, right? So 2 weeks ago, and so that was and that it ended with a suggestion, which is basically to create a space for awareness creation, right? So for a global a space for helping each other, right? On the 3 levels that you mentioned, personal, relational, and societal, helping each other to become aware of this current moment and of the choices we may have, and what it is we want to let go of, or maybe what's wanting to emerge. And so the name that I suggested for this kind of learning infrastructure, basically, like a global personal learning infrastructure, Gaia, right? Global activation of intention and action, kind of from this current situation. And within, so that was now today, it's I think 14 days ago, 13 or 14 days ago, that I posted that blog. And so it had been, so it has had over 100K views. And the idea, right, to do something around that now, right? It was a very long thing, pretty much unreadable. And the idea was only in the end. But the interesting thing is, within 12 days, this idea not only kind of got some traction, but has been starting to realize. So Friday, we had a launch session with 10,000 people into a 4-month journey, right? The Gaia journey. 5,000 of which participated in these 90-minute Zoom sessions that had live meditation, kind of music, and social resonance processes, had breakout processes, small breakout groups for these entire groups. So where they could actually, this kind of the 3 levels that you mentioned, the personal, relational, where they could actually feel that and not just talk about that. And we have within these 12 days a web infrastructure, and also a core group of over 100 people working together in that, and 5 different language groups. So all within days. So it's an enormous amount of response to basically an idea to helping each other to lean into this current moment and to deepen the awareness that we have individually and collectively around that. So it is just, and I think that's just the tip of the iceberg, because what's happening right now is that there is a huge potential present across the planet for something. I mean, most people feel like, yes, we know our civilization is hitting the wall. And yes, I do want to be part of a different story. And yes, I want to put my life, my work into the service of it, but I don't know how. And that gap, I think, is the biggest unmet need or aspiration possibility, where something could land, or where a different way of reimagining and reshaping our civilization could happen, could be seeded in the next months and years, that then will take a century, of course, to fully unfold. But this could be in a very important period. And so that's how I feel. So in other words, what you described earlier also in your talk, the collective we, if we hold this space, can actually be a place that is uplifting kind of all of us. That's already happening. I think it's happening in many of our community events right now. And all of that is part of a much larger movement that probably none of us is fully aware of, but that we can see, all the different directions and glimpses. And that's why, I also really, truly, appreciate the conversations that we are having, because we are playing a role in that, and our communities play an important role in that.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And first of all, I love it. I think it's great, and I also I see the similarities, because we were also putting together not the same but a similar project on collective trauma prevention, because we see how much of the previous trauma comes up as stress, as fear, as dissociation, as overwhelm, as decisions that are being made that are not made out of the place, as you said, your vertical line from the depth out, as a creative process, but as reactive processes where decisions are being made in culture that might not be so beneficial. And so I think, and if there are any ways we can collaborate, because we're also about to launch from the Pocket Project a similar project, a bit different, has a bit of a different connotation.
Absolutely. I think there's, and we should, continue that offline kind of later this week. I think would be great to bring you in kind of for at least kind of one of our live sessions, kind of, so you can exactly what you just mentioned, kind of make these experiences and practices more available. And we have also, I mean, for others here in the loop, I mean, the whole thing is really on our end organized really as an ecosystem. That means kind of many many initiatives and communities can create their own places and invite others into that. So it's not, and it's really meant to be a contribution to the activation of this kind of potential that we all feel, but that also, as you said before, which needs both. We need to, put the attention onto the emerging future, what's possible, but also attend to the trauma side, kind of what we are not, the unconscious side, that what we are not paying attention to, and that is so critical, and that's where we should collaborate around much more intentionally.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that's great, and I think we bring a little bit different elements to a very similar conversation. And I was gonna say that I think that we just, because we are working on the kind of coherence and presence building, and I think that's tremendously important, because if like too many people start to go into like a fear downward spiral because as you see already now, and it's just, we know that it's going to last for a longer time. We already see now how many jobs are being lost, how many like businesses are going bankrupt, like that there is a whole wave. I think the tsunami is just coming of the destruction that it also created. And I think we, like, to prevent the downward spiral, we have seen in Germany in the 30s what like such a situation can also bring. And I think if we are mindful and we, you know, there is a lot of practice how to digest and not suppress what comes up, because it's so easy to say, oh, I shouldn't be scared, I shouldn't be that,
Mm, mm,
all the shoulds and have tos that are actually symptoms of the very process that we want to track, that we come to a place of supporting each other to digest it, to stay truly human, that I can check in with myself. Am I still with an open heart, or with a kind of connected to myself? And if I'm not, it's fine, just that I notice that I'm getting overwhelmed, I'm getting stressed, I'm getting scared, and that we have spaces to digest this, to come back to that creativity that you spoke about. And I think that's very important. And I think the other part is also what can we create together co-creatively in order to, as you said, to create new structures in society out of a disruption that are more functional and more resonant. And that's why they're evolutionary wise more relevant for now. And I think now that many of the habits get really challenged quite quickly, that's also a window of opportunity. I agree with you. How that's important.
what would you say, Thomas? Is there any? So that was a question on my mind also earlier. When you look at what the Germany case, right, with the trauma of the past, with the Holocaust and everything, is there what can be learned when we look at all the different trauma that are now coming more to the surface here? What can we learn from the German case in order to how to approach it or how to not approach it?
Yeah, that we have to approach it. You said it before. In order to study social dimensions, we have to go in. And I think we all have a deep in. Every person has a deep in. Like we can all become aware of our own internal participation in that situation, in such a collective
Mm,
situation. And the more we are aware, that's why I said before, unconscious processes become our destiny. As long as we act from unconscious motivations, the past runs us. And the more we create fields, and that's why I think the conversation about we spaces is so important. The more we have fields where we become aware of those past effects, the past is unintegrated history. I often say integrated history is present, unintegrated history is the past. And if
mm,
the past is often trauma, and if
mm,
trauma runs us, it becomes our destiny. So we create again trauma.
mm,
But if we become aware of it, we actually have a new future. We have possibility. That's the presencing part in your diagram.
mm,
And so if we look how to support the society together as society, how we support our own life basis to track the collective absencing and understand its intelligence.
mm,
That the symptoms are very
mm,
destructive, but the
mm,
process of collective unconscious processes, that process is an intelligent process. That's why in the wisdom traditions, there's
mm.
a saying that the right and the left hand of God is God.
Yeah,
So the light and the dark.
I love that.
The unconscious process is an intelligent protection function of life. And
Yeah,
then it becomes dark.
yeah,
But
yeah.
if we can read what is dark as intelligent, like the internal process, not the symptom of it, the internal process, then we create a relation to that which we abandoned already. And only the abandoned part will rebel. Once it comes back into love, it's gonna become part of the whole. And And I think that's a real art. And I'm not talking about actions and behavior at first. I'm talking about that internal collective and individual process that is often experienced as other. And
Mm.
so I think there we that's worth maybe another conversation. I would love to have this conversation, how to get into the architecture of absencing.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I love this kind of approach towards absencing, to really kind of embrace its intelligence, and thereby, maybe open up new possibilities. And that's particularly so missing here in this country, but it's missing generally in the United States right now. But it's generally missing in how we deal with these phenomena, kind of, that we are confronted with so violently and visible in particularly over the past few years. So maybe I know we are edging towards the end here. So I have like a closing thought, that was also on my mind for almost, actually since your talk, right? But then I came back kind of repeatedly during our conversation as well. And that's maybe also a starting point for our next conversation. And that's a distinction. So my thesis advisor, my PhD advisor, is Johan Galtung, the peace researcher, who is who coined the term and authored the theory of structural violence, right? So there's direct violence, which is, I kill another person or somebody, you see the victim, the perpetrator. Then there's structural violence. And he he saw that term when he was on a roof in India and saw all the people suffering, but no perpetrator. So it's the economic structure, right? Kind of that is, that's what he means with structural violence. We have victims, but not individual perpetrators. But so, and what's increasingly now on my mind is, I believe there's a third form of violence, which is attentional violence. And attentional violence is attending to the world, to use your term, without awareness, right? So just, as something, basically as a result of the past, but not really connecting to these deeper levels. And attentional violence, you could say, is at the root of many of these other forms of violence. And that's the problem, really, of absencing. And, if you turn that around, you could say, well, we live in a world where maybe, we know the United States is no longer the superpower or something, and we are not sure about all the others, but maybe kind of the most important, I'm not sure power, but force, a possibility in the world to really activate the potential that's there, is awareness, right? So attention and awareness is maybe the real superpower today, and each of us is participating, right, in the process of becoming aware. And that's really I love that. It's at the root of your work, it's at the root of my work and of many others, right? It's how to deepen this process of becoming aware, as Varela said, kind of both on an individual, but today we would say, of course, also on a collective level.
That's right.
So this is to be continued.
Yes, very much so, Otto. That's, first of all, I love this thought. I think it's very on. And secondly, I think we are at the end of our time. It was so lovely. I could go on. I'm so excited, and I have so many ideas while you speak, and impulses. So it's really lovely. So thank you. I really enjoyed our time.
So did I.
Great. Thank you so much, both of you. Feel so stimulated. There was so much in that, and that last comment from you just then, Otto, attention and awareness is the real superpower today. That's really hit me. So thank you. We have lots of questions, and I know a lot of the questions we can take into the workshop that's going to be happening in an hour after this. But I wondered, are you needing to go, Otto? Do you have 5 minutes, or are you?
Sure, sure.
Yeah, it would be great just to. There's one question that sort of there were many questions actually that came up around tools that we could use now to help us in the situation that we're in, and I think both of you talked a lot around that certainly towards the end of the conversation. But there was a question here from Anne Christian Abenhaus. How does global social witnessing apply to events that happened in the past? Is there a chance of collective healing of past trauma? So I just wondered if there was anything that could be spoken to in regards to that question before we go.
I think, Thomas, that goes to you.
Yeah. First of all, yes, that's a big question, of course.
Yeah, I know.
But maybe to make it short, my understanding of the past is that unintegrated experience always creates a bubble of past. So if there is a past, it will affect me physically, it will affect me emotionally. I will have feelings and fears that don't fit into situations. I will have thoughts coming up that are not responsive to the situations, but reactive. So this means the unintegrated past, that what also trauma creates, is unintegrated split of bubbles of the past. These are all the TVs that are lying deep down on the bottom of the ocean that have been muted and thrown away where the movie was still working. And so if there are crazy scenes in a movie and it's very loud, you mute it and you take the TV and throw it in the ocean. And then you see the experience slowly disappear in the dark. That's the collective unconscious. And down there are millions of TVs that are still playing the movies, but they are mute and we don't see them. And so as long as there is a past, there is a way. We are actually because people think of what's my purpose. And my purpose is not only what I need to, or what I want to bring into the world, my work, my contribution to society. My purpose is also to heal myself and to not see the obstacles of my own development as in the way, but part of the way. So everything that we develop, the difficulties that we meet are not blocking our way. That is our way. That's, I believe, the human calling. That's why we are part of life, to clean up part of the mess that we as humanity left, and to not create so much mess again. So to leave a better world for our children to come into. So the cleaning up part of our reality is very important. As long as there is a past, it's part of our journey, it's part of our purpose. But through our purpose, we can integrate the past, and I believe presence is the state where the past becomes integrated history. So it's not anymore interfering with our perception of the current moment. And that's why I think actually in past and collective trauma healing, it's part of our purpose to do this. For some of us more, for some of us less, but I believe it's our collective purpose to take care of and often when we talk about trauma, many of the traumatizations that we deal with are actually deep ethical sidesteps that have been taken in and through humanity, like how we tortured and hurt and killed each other. That is the battlefield that is silently prevailing in the whatever movement from generation to generation. So, and I think this is deeply, every trauma healing actually is a small or big ethical correction into a deeper alignment with life. And I think that's the line that you, Otto, have in your, the vertical line, coming more into alignment with a kind of non-dual presence. But maybe you want to add.
Well, yeah, I mean, just, and that would mean, so I mean, what I heard you saying is to the question, the past is, I mean, you define, I mean, I haven't heard that before. I thought that's really interesting. You defined the past as unintegrated experience or unintegrated history, right? If I heard it right. And the presence as integrated experience or integrated history. And therefore, can you deal with traumas of the past? I mean, that's the, so it starts with the definition, right? So for you, the unintegrated, that is the trauma and that is the past. So if there is, then the answer would be if we can reconnect with our experiences and our history that way. So then the answer would be yes. And I think the only thing I would add to that, what you said is building on your last comment on the vertical dimension. I think that's really so that if you take everything you just said, we could say that for what's necessary today, right, in the decade ahead, we have massive amounts of transformation ahead of us, right? And also of transformation, institutional, personal, and relational transformation that is required now. The challenge is there, the requirement is there. What's not there? Our literacy, our transformation literacy, particularly the vertical transformation literacy. And I think what you just said is kind of part of this vertical transformation literacy that now is really in demand and should be more democratized in terms of access in the world today, has to do with how to deal with trauma, has to do with how to integrate those parts of our experiences and of our history that we have, split off in order to survive, in order to, deal with the situation we couldn't cope with otherwise. So that's, so just, I think building this as a key building block into the, what constitutes today the call for transformation literacy that needs to be developed in so many places.